Hi, everyone. This is Talk Back, rather. We want you to talk back and tell us what you think, too. It is Tuesday, November 30th. We're almost on the cusp of December, the big holiday season, the end of 2021. What progress have we made this year in all the things we needed to do? We'll take stock of that. But let's also take stock of a very important issue in our community. That is the issue of domestic violence and the organization for 45 years that has helped our community deal with that issue by taking away fear, by helping people cope with the problems of domestic violence that plague our families, our men, women, and children. Safe Futures is a fabulous organization, but they are now going on to the next step. There is still much to be done, and I'm very happy to have today a guest who is intimately involved in a project to take the care of domestic violence issues in our area to the next level, of family justice center called the Center for Safe Futures. So let me introduce Marie Kenny. Hi, Marie. It's great to have you here today.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. And we really can't summarize all the progress since the 1960s and 70s till today that we've made in the field of domestic violence. But we'll get a start with you, and then we'll talk about the exciting new project that you're working on. And then I know the executive director, Catherine Verano, who wasn't able to be here today, but she'll be here next time, has really been the moving party, the moving person to get this thing going. I want you to talk about that too. But first, you, Marie, what has been your role in the world of domestic violence prevention over these years? Tell us.
Well, I originally got into working on domestic violence when I was still living in Massachusetts. I was a state trooper. I was assigned to the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office as a specialized investigator. And I investigated sexual assault and domestic violence cases. I also got involved at the governor's office with statewide public policy around domestic violence. And then my husband and I moved our family to Connecticut. I began volunteering at Safe Futures. It was called the Women's Center at the time. This is our 45th anniversary. And you're right, there's been quite a transformation in the agency over those years. So I joined the board of directors. I served as president. And then when I moved off the board, I continued to volunteer for a little while. I did step away from volunteering when I worked for the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence because I had some oversight responsibilities for Safe Futures, so I could no longer be volunteering there. So stepped away for a couple of years, came back a little while ago, just doing prevention education per diem. And then COVID hit, and I think you were at the planning conference for this Family Justice Center model. And so last summer, not this past summer, so the summer of 2020, Kathy asked to meet with me and asked if I was interested in working more regularly and serving as the project coordinator for this project. And I leapt at the opportunity to be involved in this because it really will transform how we deliver services in southeastern Connecticut.
All right. So give us a little overview then. Tell us how Safe Futures has changed in the services that it's started with back in the 70s and how it's come to this point today where we need a different plan.
My understanding in that, and I think I have the history correct, but I believe the Women's Center originally started as a hotline for women who were trying to get back into the workforce. And then they were receiving phone calls from women who were reporting sexual assault, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. And so they started with a network of safe homes, eventually did fundraising and opened a shelter. We have a 24-hour hotline. So Safe Futures now has grown, and we'll talk a little bit about this in the slides that you'll present in a little bit, but we have a wide range of program areas. We have the 24-hour hotline. We have walk-in crisis counseling. We have advocates in the courthouses, both the civil, to deal with civil cases and criminal cases, to help victims of domestic violence and survivors navigate those systems. We have a very extensive housing program where we've got transitional living, where survivors can get an apartment for low or sliding scale or no rent, and some job training and support around their domestic violence experiences. And they can live in that apartment for up to 18 months. And then we have supportive housing throughout the area in southeastern Connecticut, where people can move into their own apartments, but continue to receive supportive services from Safe Futures. So what's changing is we have Safe Futures has, and Kathy Verano, our CEO, really has led the charge from when she was in the court as an advocate and then as a director of the advocacy program in the courts, really reached out to collaborate in a very meaningful way with law enforcement, prosecutors, and other people working in the court system to help to better support victims of domestic violence, their children, and also to hold offenders accountable for their crimes of violence. So now that she's the CEO, and actually when she interviewed to be the CEO, Kathy was very clear in the interviews that her long-term goal was to establish what's known as a family justice center, which is really just a different way of delivering the services we already deliver. And what that means is, in addition to our partnerships with some healthcare providers and our partnership with some of the other social service agencies and our partnerships with law enforcement, all of those partners will be in one building. So rather than asking a survivor to go from one office to another to receive services, those agencies will be co-located under one roof. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for wraparound services for victims and their children. So that, first of all, it's simpler. They don't have to travel all over southeastern Connecticut to get a range of services, but more than just being kind of roommates in this building, the partners will actually collaborate and work as a team to better support survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault, stalking, and trafficking. So there'll be more of a cohesive safety net than just referring people to places where they can get additional services. All those service providers will work as one team for that survivor.
So now, of course, when I started practicing law back in the 70s, so many people, especially women who were faced with domestic violence issues, were afraid to call the police. They didn't think they would be handled well by the police. They thought they might be arrested themselves. Things have changed a great deal with the legislation, but there are still many people in the shadows, and there are still many hoops that people feel they have to go through in order to get any services or any support for their issues. Safe Futures is wonderful, but I see what you're saying. So that instead of going to Safe Futures and talking on the hotline and getting some support, you might get referred to a psychologist, you might get referred to a lawyer, you might get referred to a social worker, you might get referred to a work counselor, and so on, right, Marie? You might get referred to so many different places and sources that you have to go find on your own. Finances is also an issue as well that maybe we'll talk about, how people can afford all these services. They're all free when you go to Safe Futures, sponsored by the community. But that's kind of the idea, to feel safe, to feel secure, and to get the help in one place. Start in one place, and all the referrals will be there for you. Is that the idea?
That's exactly the idea. And you mentioned that there are still people who are suffering from abuse within their home by their loved ones, who are still in the shadows. And when you look at what we know, on average, 1 out of 4 women, 1 out of 7 men are victims of domestic violence. And then you look at the population of southeastern Connecticut, it is very reasonable and realistic to estimate that there are between 25 and 30,000 people in our community right now who have suffered from intimate partner violence or domestic violence, some kind of intra-family abuse. And we are not serving 25 to 30,000 people. So we know there are so many people still who are not able, for a variety of reasons, to take advantage of the services that are here. And that's one of the goals of this Center for Safe Futures too, would be to be more visible, have more opportunities for people to be connected to all these services, because they may come in to meet with a mental health clinician, but that mental health clinician is going to be working with us and with the Sexual Assault Crisis Center. So there'll be more opportunity, more ways kind of into the service network. So we're hoping to throw some people out of those shadows and get them in for services.
And court advocates will be right there. So if there is a need for the criminal justice system to take a role in this, they're right there as well, right?
Exactly. All of that will be, the police and prosecutors will be in the building. We'll have civil attorneys. We're looking to connect to make sure that if people are having trouble with their immigration status, that they can get, free or low cost legal representation around that too. So we are really looking to make sure that we have a really, really broad base of service providers, so that whatever barrier a particular person is up against in trying to break free or looking for safety, we want to try and address as many of those barriers as possible and eliminate them as when they stop them from interfering people accessing our services.
Right. So this concept is being envisioned by Kathy Verano and everyone at Safe Futures, but it's not a brand new thing. It's something that has been developing around the country. There are other family justice centers in California and other places. Is that right?
Yes, there are. So Casey Gwynn and Gail Strack are two folks from San Diego. They both were prosecutors in the domestic violence unit for the San Diego District Attorney's Office. They created, in the early 2000s, they created the first Family Justice Center in San Diego, and Gail Strack was actually the director of that. Casey, I believe, was still the city prosecutor. So now they've created an organization called the Alliance for Hope. And what the Alliance does is help communities like ours. They provide the technical support needed to create this new model of service delivery. So there are family justice centers in 40 states in the US and another dozen or so countries. And the Alliance for Hope does provide us with kind of sample operation manuals and policies and intake procedures and things like that. So what we do then is we can start from that foundation and tailor it so that our Family Justice Center in Southeastern Connecticut needs to look different from what the ones in Manhattan look like. So what this does, it gives us a framework, but we are then really able, and my project in particular is designed to make sure that our Center for Safe Futures, our Family Justice Center model, is specifically in tune with what survivors in Southeastern Connecticut need.
Right. Good. So we're going to show some slides now, a little video from YouTube, because there's a video that gives the overall area about where the center is going to be constructed. Where is that going to be?
Well, so that's an interesting story in and of itself, because our main office is in New London, and Safe Futures has been in New London for most of its existence. We have a satellite office in Norwich as well, but when Kathy Verano started on this journey for Safe Futures, the assumption was that we would build this new facility in New London. And I think you did attend at least the first part. We had a 2-day planning conference where the folks, Gail and Casey from the Alliance for Hope, came in. A 2-day planning conference where we had almost 100 people from different fields in Southeastern Connecticut to brainstorm, what do we want our Family Justice Center to look like? And it was right as COVID was hitting. But one of the takeaways from that 2-day program and getting feedback from almost 100 different people was New London can be very tricky for many people to get access to, so that geographically it wasn't ideal. Now, when we were looking for properties, we did definitely look at a lot of properties in New London, but we looked at what's the mass transit accessibility, what's the highway accessibility, things like that. But the piece of property that you're about to show the video of is actually on Route 85 in Waterford. It's right off 395, which is between Crossroad and 395 for people who are familiar with the area. And what that means is whether you're coming from Stonington, Lyme, Norwich, Colchester, wherever in our catchment area you're coming from, this is the most central location. Easiest access.
Let's show the video. Okay. Great. Let me take that back. All right. So that gave a nice overview of Route 85, or what they call the Hartford Road, and the areas. And want to make any comment on it before we go on?
It's a beautiful piece of property. It's almost 11 acres. And you can see the little pine trees. It used to be a Christmas tree farm, but the property actually goes up the hill and into the woods. So we'll be able to have some walking trails. We'll have plenty of space for the building and for outdoor spaces. But it's really, if you've driven on Route 85, you would be stunned when you walk onto that piece of property. It's very serene. It's very peaceful. You don't feel like you're right on 85 with all that busyness. So the building will be able to be set back a bit. It's a phenomenal piece of property that we were able to purchase through a bequest, actually a couple different bequests, one of which we were not expecting. So we were able to make the purchase of the property based on those existing finances.
Okay, great. Now let's look at the slideshow that you have sent to us.
Okay.
So we can, you see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, from the beginning. All right. You can give us some commentary, Marie, as we go forward. So it's going to be called the Center for Safe Futures, but it's going to be a family justice center on the model of what you described, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, talk about this.
Okay, so this slide basically captures all the different program areas that Safe Futures currently has. And so we use this because a lot of people don't realize, they may know that we have a hotline and an emergency shelter, but they don't realize the really broad range of other services that we have. The Center for Safe Futures is one project and one program area within all of these program areas. So there's a lot going on at Safe Futures. We have 45 staff people, 30 of whom are full-time, 15 are per diem or part-time. And you can see from the number of program areas, that staff does a lot of work for a lot of clients.
Right. Okay.
So this represents the kind of a highlight of the statistics of the services that we provided in fiscal year 21. So starting in July 1st of 2021 through June 30th of July 1st of 2020. So right in the middle of the first wave of COVID through this June. We served 9,707 victims of domestic violence. What we saw in this fiscal year was a 39% increase, almost a 40% increase in the number of new clients we served in that one fiscal year. So we know that besides the dramatic health consequences of COVID, there were a lot of social consequences and an increase in domestic violence. What we saw was more frequency, but in particular, we saw much more higher levels of severity in the violence and abuse. So a 39% increase in 1 year is monumental. We had, and again, because of COVID restrictions, we couldn't house as many people in our shelter as we normally would. So we had more people who needed shelter and fewer beds basically that we could use in the shelter. So we had to use emergency hotel space for people. So our costs were dramatically over what we had budgeted for a typical year for hotel expenses. You see the number that kind of jumps out at you, 35%.
Yes,
35. Yeah, so 35% of all the criminal cases in Southeastern Connecticut are domestic violence related.
Wow.
So the victim advocates from Safe Futures are the advocates on all of those cases. So that's a sizable percentage of all the criminal charges issued and prosecuted in Southeastern Connecticut are related to domestic violence. The lower right-hand piece of that slide, you'll see in the next slide, and I can talk, or in a future slide, but that describes our lethality assessment program, which is one of the partnerships that Kathy Verano spearheaded years ago, probably close to 10 years ago, where the police and advocates are trained together. And when the police respond to a domestic violence call, if the officer believes that there is some significant risk, he or she will do a very brief yes or no danger assessment, a lethality assessment. What's the likelihood that this person I'm with tonight is at risk of a homicide? And so the lethality assessment program has been hugely successful as a partnership, where it takes victims who are identified by the police at that time as being at higher risk for homicide and connects them directly to services at Safe Future. So that's an amazing project. I'll show you in a little bit why we know that collaboration is effective. And it's that kind of partnership that we're looking to replicate with all the other service providers in the Center for Safe Futures.
Right. And of course, as you pointed out, during COVID, when people are kind of stuck in homes together, there was an explosion of domestic violence cases, not just in Connecticut, all over the world.
Yes.
And I guess Safe Futures was able to handle it. It was able to take note of it, take care of it in a way.
Well, and one of the things about Safe Futures was they never closed, not at all, never closed for business. And some other agencies did have to close temporarily to regroup. But Kathy's she's just so creative. Like one of the things she said was, well, let's get plexiglass barn doors so the clients can still come in person, but there's a barrier, a complete air barrier between the client and the advocate. And Reggie, our master of facilities, Reggie Dublin, next thing you know, there's barn doors on all the offices and all the counseling spaces, so that, and in the shelter too, they were able to incorporate some of that. So the staff could go in and be safe and not worry about catching COVID, but also not worry about spreading COVID if they had been exposed someplace else. So we were able to stay open, and that is largely due to Kathy's creativity and then Reggie's being able to brainstorm a way to make it happen. And then the staff, quite frankly, being willing to keep working through COVID, because let's face it, everyone was concerned about exposing themselves, but the staff at Safe Futures just kept working through the whole thing.
Right. And we took a look at that already. We thought, yes.
So within the building, there are going to be a variety of different kinds of spaces. We're going to have just a ton of offices. The Safe Futures administrative offices will be there, but we also need office space then for service providers from the agencies that we'll be partnering with. So we'll have smaller offices where one-to-one counseling can be done. We'll have meeting rooms where maybe a team of providers can brainstorm what this client needs. We'll have some larger meeting rooms for when that's necessary. Some of the agencies, and we have, it's probably close to a dozen agencies who have already said they want to place one of their staff in the building permanently. So we know we need that. But there are other agencies, maybe they're smaller, maybe they're not an agency that clients are going to be looking for all the time. So we'll have kind of available office space that's not locked into one person, so that we can call someone. Like, say, I'm using this as an example, but let's just say we don't have immigration attorneys full-time in the building. Maybe we have someone come in once a month or twice a month, or maybe we have them come in as needed. So we will have offices that can be allocated for partners who are not full-time in the building. And then we are going to have, you saw from the video, it's a beautiful piece of land. So we will have some outdoor spaces and some walking trails up into the hill. But it's also important for your viewers to know that the satellite offices that Safe Futures currently has in Norwich and in New London will remain open. There will be walk-in capacity in both those cities. We're not going to be pulling up completely from those two areas. So there still will be the ability for someone who's in crisis to do walk in and get services in New London and in Norwich.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a lot of exciting things in this building. So we'll have a virtual courtroom. We are hoping there's a movement now toward allowing, for instance, restraining order hearings. Maybe.
So will these be actual hearings, or when you say virtual, people will be able to have kind of a rehearsal for what may happen to them in court?
It'll be both. So it'll be set up so that it can feel like a courtroom, so that we can talk to witnesses and kind of prep them, because the prosecutors will be in this building with us. They've partnered with us. But we're also hoping that, and there seems to be some sense that this will happen, that some of these hearings will continue to be allowed virtually. So, for instance, restraining order hearings, what a gift that would be to be able to, if I'm going for a restraining order and I have little children, my kids can play in the playroom. I can come here, have my hearing virtually. I don't have to be in the waiting room with my abuser. So we're hoping that we'll be able to still maintain some of those virtual services that the courts have right now. We'll also have a training room, because cross-training among our partner agencies is going to be the foundation of our success in collaborating. But it's a training room that will also be available to community groups if they have the need for a space. We'll have spaces for kids, reading rooms, activity rooms, so that while a parent is getting services, they don't have to worry. They know where their child is and they're safe and they're cared for. Lounges and snack bars for clients, staff lounge, a quiet room or a chapel, some kind of quiet space. Sometimes the clients, and sometimes the staff too, but certainly the clients just need a quiet space to gather their thoughts. There will be a wellness center built in that we're hoping will have classes available to clients as well as staff. A computer lab and a learning center, both for kids, for adults who are looking to finish their GED or do resume building and interview training, things like that. We'll have some forensic interview rooms where we can conduct really thorough interviews for victims of domestic violence. Then the police, and I mean, typically if it's an adult, the police officer will be doing the interviews, but it won't be a typical police department office. Everything will feel comfortable and cozy. We'll have outdoor spaces, and then obviously cutting edge IT and security. One of the things that's not on this slide is that we have, through the leadership of the Alliance for Hope, we've created what's called a Voices Committee. And Voices is a group of survivors who are no longer in crisis. They've done a lot of their healing, so they don't need a support group, because this is not a support group. But the Voices Committee is a group of survivors who we can tap into to ask, what do these rooms need to feel like? How do we make sure this building is accessible to everyone who needs to come in? So they will help kind of design the finer touches of the facility. All right, so I mentioned the lethality assessment program on the slide with all of Safe Futures statistics. That program came out of a study conducted by Jackie Campbell, where she reviewed 2,500 domestic violence murders.
Wow.
What she found was that 44% of the domestic violence killers had been arrested within that previous year for domestic violence. and yet they were out and available to commit murder.
Wow.
And out of those 25, then this is what really was the motivator for this whole project. Out of those 2,500 victims of domestic violence who were killed, only 4% of them had ever contacted a domestic violence program in the year prior to their murder. So the lethality assessment program, or LAP, is the ultimate example of what kind of success you can have in a warm handoff and a good collaboration. So what we know in Southeastern Connecticut, for instance, the police conducted in fiscal year 2021, the police conducted 783 lethality assessment screens.
Mm-hmm.
They identified 375 victims of being at high risk of being murdered.
Right.
Now remember, 2,500 cases of murder, only 4% of those victims had used domestic violence services.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing in Southeastern Connecticut is out of the 375 victims who are identified as being at high risk of a homicide, 81% of those victims are immediately connected at the scene, on the phone, by the police, to an advocate.
Yeah. So a couple of things, Marie, along that line. Is it true? I think the statistic is about 3 to 4 women I know are killed every day in domestic violence incidents.
You know what? That sounds right. I haven't.
I believe that was the last statistic that I learned. And the other thing that's also of interest was the idea that it takes 5 or 6 episodes of a domestic violence incident to have someone leave the perpetrator or really get to services. Isn't that so?
Yes. Well, actually, I think it's more like 6 or 7 or 8. And what that refers to is a victim of domestic violence. Typically, the average breaks up and ends the relationship an average of 6 or 7 times and goes back. So before they're able to leave for good.
Right.
And the goal of the Family Justice Center model is that we provide, so when a victim recognizes the danger they're in and realizes they deserve a better, healthier, loving relationship, that there be all the supports they need so that they can leave for good the first time they decide to leave for good. So that they don't have to go back. They're not manipulated. They're not needed financially or housing or things like that. That the support network is available to them so that it doesn't take so many times of leaving before they are able to leave.
Right. And also, once the leaving takes place, that is the most dangerous time. That's
Yes.
when they need the support services the most, right?
Yes, which is why, I mean, many of the victims that I worked with when I was on the state police said, quite frankly, they're safer at home where they can monitor their abuser than if they leave and then they don't know where their abuser is or what they're up to or whether they're spiraling out of control. So as awful as it sounds for a lot of victims, it is safer to go back than to try and leave. And our goal is to flip that equation so that they get what they need to be safe when they're leaving.
Right. So every case needs an individual assessment of how best to save that person's life, right?
Yes.
Yes, of course. Okay, we did that. Okay. More partnerships.
Yes. So the LAP, I think, gives us just concrete numbers and evidence to support the fact that if we work together on behalf and to support victims of domestic violence benefit. So this project is all about building partnerships in this building. So these are partners, like these are either agencies or fields that we know have already committed to being in the building with us. Career planning and training, child care professionals, child welfare services, a wide range of court services from civil attorneys to the criminal court cases, education professionals. We have we're going to be looking at medical services and how to have that available to clients. Mental health services for adults, for children, and for substance use disorders or whatever other mental health issues people will come in with. We also are going to be partnering with people who know about providing services for those with disabilities, again, to make sure we're accessible regardless of someone's disability, but also to make sure that we have a fabric of partners that we can make sure we're being attentive to what this wide range of survivors need. And then we also will be partnering with the local sexual assault service agency to make sure that that particular type of offense victims are supported specifically with sexual assault crisis counseling. So my job is, quite frankly, probably the best job in Southeastern Connecticut right now, I think. And it's all about bringing these people together. So Kathy recruited members of our steering committee. The steering committee is 19 individuals, 15 different agencies and professions are represented out of those 19 people. And they oversee. So those are the CEOs, executive directors, and presidents of many of the agencies we're partnering with. Decision-making level people at these agencies. So the steering committee is overseeing the whole planning process. So we have 6 different working groups that will so we've kind of divided up the tasks among 6 different working groups. Across those working groups, we've got more than 65 additional volunteers, and those folks represent 22 different agencies and professions. So we'll be building our operations manual, our service delivery models, our assessment and evaluation programs, our community engagement and outreach training, our volunteer program. All of that will be planned through the working groups. It will be reviewed by the steering committee. And then once the steering committee approves, it will go to the Safe Futures Board of Directors, since all of this will come under the Safe Futures agency.
All right. And so you are involved in the formulation of all of these partnerships and the internal workings of the center, as well as the building of it, the external process too, right?
Yes. So we will have a building committee. We had a group, a multidisciplinary group that helped us identify the piece of property that we bought. So that group will be reconstituting with a few new members, I'm sure, to work on actually designing the building, the layout, the flow, with input from our Voices Committee, but also then the exterior, the grounds, and what will we be able to do to take advantage of the beautiful piece of property we're on. So we will have the building committee. My job is to facilitate each of these groups. So the groups each have co-chairs.
Right.
My job is to make sure the co-chairs get what they need, help support administratively, to make sure the working groups, so like, for instance, I can get model policies and things like that for them to review. So they're not writing everything out of thin air. Let's take what other people have done. There's 2 other family justice centers in Connecticut, for instance. They've been very helpful in providing resources to us so that our working groups don't have to come up from scratch with these protocols and policies and documents. We have some models, and we just need to tweak it so that it makes sense for us and our partners and primarily for our clients in Southeastern Connecticut.
Yeah. Okay. I like this slide because this kind of encapsulates what you're doing.
Yes.
Professionals together to help victims in one place. That's a great concept.
So rather than us setting it up like this is what you need when you come to us, no, the victims, the clients, the survivors come first. So everything is designed to meet their needs, and our responsibility is to work together to make sure clients are getting what they deserve.
Right. And I know that there'll be projects to raise the funds necessary. How much of the program, we'll go back now, how much of the program to build a center is funded through grants, state and federal funding, and how much has to come through individual donations, contributions?
There will be a mix, and it'll probably be a similar mix to our typical operating budget, where we do get some money from each of the 21 cities and towns we serve. We get some federal grants that are passed through our statewide domestic violence coalition. We apply for private grants, but then we do rely heavily on individual donations as well. So the capital campaign, I haven't seen the plan yet, but my guess is it will include all of that. Where is there federal money or state money that we can tap into? One of the things to be clear about this, we are not interested in taking money that another social service agency needs. Okay, we want to partner with them, so we can't tap into their funding stream. What we're looking to do is make our application is to apply for money as a partnership that we couldn't apply for as an individual agency. So we really are very mindful. That's why we have so many different agencies on the steering committee. This won't work if we drive our nonprofit partners out of business because we tap into their funding streams. This will only work if we find additional funding, which is what the capital campaign will be designed to help us identify.
All right. So Marie, this is an exciting project for you. I can see your enthusiasm, and it's great for our community. Tell us, do you have some idea as to when the groundbreaking will happen, and when the project will be completed and we can open the doors and walk through them?
I don't know. I think Kathy is saying, 2 years. And I assume the groundbreaking would be before that, but I think, still 2 years or so, she would like to be in this building. Now, the other good news, one of the things that the Alliance for Hope can help us with is creating what's called a soft opening. So we can find a space that makes sense, like it has enough room, but we can take 2 or 3 different agencies and start meeting with survivors so that we can practice our intake policy, our universal intake process is working, our ability to share information and keep other information confidential, that works. So it'll give us the chance to practice on a much smaller scale what some of these partnerships are going to look like, so we can fine tune them and fix what needs to be fixed before we open the full building with all the partner agencies in the building together. So, we're hoping to do that kind of phase 1 soft opening sometime mid to late spring 2022. And that will give us a good opportunity to start delivering services with this model without even being in the building.
Okay, so we need the services, but the key thing that we've talked about and that you mentioned in the beginning is the people that are still in the shadows and the thousands of people in our community who are not coming out. So tell us how this new Family Justice Center, the Center for Safe Futures, will make a difference and bring some of those people out of the shadows. Will it be because of the partnerships with the other community agencies, or what other programs will there be to get those people in the shadows into the open?
That's a great question. And it will have a lot to do with the partners themselves, with all of us. So for instance, one of the working groups is community engagement, education, outreach, and volunteers. So that group, which has members from all these different partner agencies on it, is helping to design our outreach and education programs. And so it won't be just Safe Futures, but now we're going to have all these partner agencies also talking about this new center. The other thing is that if we have a mental health provider, for instance, who's in the building, they can see clients. I mean, we can't serve anyone who has a record of domestic violence because of federal funding restrictions. We're not allowed to serve. Our building would not be allowed to serve abusers, but they can bring other clients in, and maybe because it's a more convenient location than their main office, someone comes into this new building to receive whatever counseling they were going to receive in the agency's main building. But now that counselor is thinking a little bit differently about, well, why is this anxiety and depression amping up? And by asking questions, they may identify intimate partner violence or domestic violence or some kind of familial abuse, that because there's going to be so much interaction and so much cross-training, Safe Futures advocates may be able to identify substance use disorder or other mental health issues, so we can refer to those agencies. But those agencies may also, the expectation is they will also become more adept at identifying domestic violence cases, for instance, and referring to us so that we can talk about what other resources are available in addition to the mental health clinician. So the community engagement outreach programs will be all the partners talking about this. So that'll spread the word. But then also just the partners, there'd be more ways to come into getting services.
Right. So in the last minutes that we have, I want you to give us some final thoughts. Tell us what you most want to say about the Justice Center, and a final shout out to Kathy Verano, who I know is probably listening.
Hey, yes. So I can't wait for you to have Kathy on here yourself, because she really is the Pied Piper on this. Although I guess the Pied Piper isn't a good example, but she's the Johnny Appleseed. She's been spreading the enthusiasm and the energy, and she's recruited such a phenomenal group of partners, which is why I do love my job so much, because of the people I'm working with. What will make this different is, yes, we will be working as teams to support victims of domestic violence. We are also really aggressively looking at making sure we are accessible to marginalized groups who don't typically call 24-hour hotlines or call domestic violence organizations because they don't think it's for them. We want to make sure that regardless of someone's economic, racial, ethnic background, religious background, their sexual orientation or gender identification, regardless, they know they will be welcomed at the Center for Safe Futures and that they will receive high quality services. And that is very exciting. I think there's so many opportunities the way this is designed to be constructed, especially with the Voices Committee. There's going to be so many opportunities for us to hear from survivors in our community what they want from our community. And to me, that's flipping the system on its head, because typically you'd have public policymakers deciding what these organizations should do and how agencies should function. Well, now we're asking the survivors, what do you want? How should it feel? And what should it look like? And I think that in and of itself is probably the most exciting part of this whole project.
All right, great. Well, Marie, it's been great having you, and we'll hear a lot more about it in the coming months, and we'll hear from Kathy, hopefully. And thank you, everyone, for listening. www.safefuturesct.org. Go on and find out about the important agency that helps people in our area. Contribute to it, learn about it, and tell your family and friends. We'll see you next time on Talkback. Thanks, Marie.
Thank
Bye.
you so much, Sheila. Bye.
Okay, bye.